There's a certain kind of famous person who treats every public appearance like a performance that never really ends camera ready. Quote, ready, always on, even when nobody's rolling. And then there's Rowan Atkinson, a man who has spent close to 50 years as one of the most recognizable faces on the planet and has somehow never once looked like he cared. He's climbed out of a burning supercar and waited for the ambulance without raising his voice. He's sat across from journalists who tried to draw him out and watched him retreat further into himself instead. He slipped into a full impression of a Formula One broadcaster's voice, live, on camera, so convincingly that the man being impersonated didn't notice for several minutes. He's told interviewers flatly that he doesn't enjoy doing interviews, then sat there and did the interview anyway, unbothered by the contradiction. This isn't a highlight reel of a man being rude, and it isn't a highlight reel of a man being cold. It's something stranger and, honestly, rarer than either of those, a genuinely famous person who never seems to perform being famous at all. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why people who've known Rowan Atkinson for decades describe him the same way, over and over, in almost the exact same words, the funniest man they know, and the quietest one in the room.
Just do it with an expression. So, for example, if you were presented with McLaren F1, think of another one. The imperiousness one gets from a Range Rover.
Ah, right, okay.
Let's start with the moment that sums up his whole personality better than almost anything else, a moment that wasn't even supposed to be about him. At a Formula One Grand Prix a few years back, veteran broadcaster Martin Brundle was doing his famous pre-race grid walk, working his way through a crowd of celebrities, drivers and team bosses, microphone out, looking for his next interview. When he found Atkinson standing in the crowd, a long-time motorsport enthusiast who's been attending races for years, Atkinson didn't just say hello. He launched straight into an impression of Brundle himself, the exact cadence, the exact delivery, greeting Brundle in Brundle's own broadcasting voice, and kept the bit running through an entire exchange about the race. Brundle, mic in hand, sailed right through the conversation without appearing to clock what was happening, asking his usual questions and getting answers delivered in a flawless copy of his own voice. It wasn't a planned bit for a talk show. Nobody had booked Atkinson for a segment. He simply saw an opening in an ordinary 5-second exchange, and quietly, almost invisibly, turned it into a joke that only worked because he refused to break character or ask for credit. He didn't nudge the camera, he didn't look for a reaction, he just did the impression and let it exist or not exist, entirely unbothered either way. That's the whole engine behind everything else on this list. A man who's funny largely because he refuses to signal that he's trying to be. Rewind further back to a night in 1999, and you get a very different flavor of the same nonchalance, this one under actual pressure. Atkinson, already one of the most famous comedians alive, thanks to Mr. Bean and Blackadder, was driving his McLaren F1 at the time, the fastest production road car ever built, when he rear-ended another vehicle, damaging the car. The garage owner who arrived to help load the wrecked supercar onto a truck later recalled something odd about the drive that followed. Atkinson barely said a word the entire way, apparently less worried about the crash itself than about saying something that might end up twisted into a headline. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't defensive. He was just quiet, the same instinct that keeps him quiet in interview chairs, now showing up in the front seat of a wrecked hypercar with a stranger he'd just met. A dozen years later, that same nonchalance got tested in a far more serious way. In August 2011, Atkinson lost control of that same McLaren F1 on a slick country road near Peterborough, spun off the tarmac, and struck a tree and a road sign hard enough to tear the car nearly in two. The rear caught fire, the engine, a 6. 1 litre 512 worth more than most houses, was reportedly thrown clear of the wreck by roughly 20 yards. It was, by any measure, the kind of crash a person doesn't casually walk away from. Atkinson did exactly that. He climbed out of the burning car under his own power, suffered nothing worse than a shoulder injury, and simply waited by the side of the road with a passerby until the fire crews and ambulance arrived. No press statement in the moment, no visible panic, no interviews from a hospital bed demanding sympathy. The crash went on to become the largest single-car insurance payout in British history, and years later, when people ask Atkinson about it, he talks about it the way most people describe a minor inconvenience with a printer. Notice the pattern climbing here already. A quiet joke made for no audience in particular, a silent drive home after a minor crash, choosing discretion over drama. And then a genuinely dangerous accident, survived and handled with the same flat, unbothered calm he'd shown over something as small as a fender bender. Each moment raises the stakes considerably physically, emotionally, publicly, and each time, Atkinson's temperature barely moves. It's not just crashes and racetracks either. Atkinson has spent decades doing press for some of the biggest comedy franchises in the world. Mr. Bean, Johnny English, Blackadder, and even in the middle of a scripted press day, surrounded by publicists whose entire job is to keep him talkative and on message, he tends to answer questions the way he'd answer a question from a stranger at a bus stop, honestly, briefly, and without any obvious effort to sound quotable. Journalists who've interviewed him describe him as pleasant, unhurried, and almost aggressively unimpressed by his own fame, a man who removes his glasses for a chat, settles into whatever chair he's given, and talks about his career the way someone might talk about a job they happen to be good at, rather than a calling they're desperate to defend. There's no visible hunger in it, no sense that he needs the interviewer to walk away liking him more than he already does. That same refusal to perform an emotion he isn't actually feeling shows up constantly once you start looking at how he handles the press. In 1993, sitting down for a Danish television interview, Atkinson told the interviewer, plainly, that he was a very private person who spent time either alone or with the people he loved, and that he didn't especially enjoy being interviewed at all. He said this while doing the interview. He wasn't storming out, wasn't refusing to answer, wasn't being difficult for the cameras. He simply told the truth about how he felt about the format he was currently participating in, then kept participating in it anyway, because that's what the job required. People who've worked closely with him for decades describe the same quality from the other side of the table. Richard Curtis, his longtime writing partner and one of his oldest friends, has said that at parties, Atkinson is essentially furniture. He sits in the corner, says almost nothing, and lets the room happen around him. Not sulking, not standoffish, just genuinely, completely comfortable being the quietest person present at an event most other famous people would treat as a stage. That discomfort with performing for its own sake goes all the way back to how Atkinson has talked about fame itself. In interviews around the release of the first Bean film, he described being funny professionally as something closer to agony than pleasure, admitting that the longer he spent in the business, the more uncertain and unsettled it made him feel, a strange thing to hear from a man whose entire career is built on making people laugh. Friends have called him the classic introverted extrovert, someone who will happily make a fool of himself in front of 100 million people watching a film, but who would rather not play a simple party game in front of 4 friends in someone's living room. He's talked about deliberately turning down high-profile opportunities and overexposure, describing his approach to his own career at one point as preferring to juggle with one ball at a time, rather than chase every offer or every headline available to him. Even in a Time magazine interview built specifically to draw out something quotable, when asked whether funny things tended to happen to him personally, his answer was almost aggressively deadpan. Not really. He said he wasn't a natural comic. He needed to think about things for a long while before he could manage to be even remotely amusing. That same detachment even shows up in the rare moments when Atkinson is the one asking the questions instead of answering them. Early in his career, he co-created and starred in a BBC Radio 3 series called The Atkinson People, a set of satirical interviews with fictional public figures, written alongside his old university friend Richard Curtis. Years later, in character and out of it, he found himself on the other side of a real microphone, interviewing Elton John, a genuine music legend, sat across from a comedian who by then was famous enough in his own right that most people in his position would have used the moment to be charming, to perform warmth, to visibly enjoy being the one holding the microphone for once. By most accounts, Atkinson simply asked the questions and let the conversation happen, without turning the encounter into a personality showcase for himself. It's a small, easy-to-miss detail, but it fits the same shape as everything else. Given a rare chance to be the center of attention in a completely different way, he still didn't reach for it. That instinct extends to the parts of his career most performers would treat as opportunities to reinvent their public image. When Atkinson agreed, in his 50s, to make his first appearance in a straight West End play, Simon Gray's Quatermain's Terms, a serious, largely dialogue-driven drama with nothing in common with Mr. Bean's silent slapstick, it would have been the perfect moment for a press tour built around reinvention, a see me in a new light narrative fed to every outlet willing to run it. Instead, Atkinson gave one of his more thoughtful interviews on the subject, admitting plainly that he'd come to see acting as a harder, less flippant job than he'd assumed earlier in his career, and explaining his approach to picking projects as one of deliberate restraint juggling, as he put it, one ball at a time rather than several. He wasn't selling the play as a transformation. He was just describing, quietly and more or less matter-of-factly, why he'd said yes to this one thing and no to almost everything else offered to him in the years around it. Here's the thing that connects every single one of these moments, from a 5-second joke at a racetrack to walking away from a burning car. Rowan Atkinson never seems to be managing how the moment looks from the outside. He doesn't escalate a crash into a dramatic story, and he doesn't escalate a joke into a bit that needs an audience to land. He doesn't fill silences just because silence makes other people uncomfortable. He lets the silence sit exactly as long as it wants to sit. Most famous people, understandably, learn to read a room and give it what it seems to want, whether that's charm, drama, humility, or a big reaction. Atkinson appears to have decided somewhere along the way that he'd rather just be exactly as interested or exactly as unbothered as he actually is in the moment and let everyone else adjust to that instead. It's worth sitting with how differently all of this could have gone. A famous comedian could have turned a burning hypercar story into a headline-grabbing, dramatized retelling for years afterward. A private person forced into constant press cycles could have faked warmth and enthusiasm for every single interview, the way most public figures learn to. A man who dislikes performing socially could have hired a team to manage his image into something more conventionally likable and available. None of that happened. Every single time, Atkinson chose the quieter, flatter, less performative version of the moment, not because it played better, but because it was simply true to how he was actually feeling. And that's what makes the Brundle gridwalk clip land so differently once you know everything else. It wasn't a stunt built for virality. It was a private joke, made for an audience of maybe one person who might not even notice, by a man who has spent his entire adult life being funny on purpose in front of the whole world, and completely unremarkable on purpose everywhere else. Because the same man who can make an entire cinema howl without saying a single word as Mr. Bean is the same man who climbed out of a wrecked, burning supercar and just quietly waited for help. And the same man who told a television interviewer to her face that he didn't much care for being interviewed, sitting there being interviewed the entire time. That's the real reason people keep bringing these stories back up, years and sometimes decades later. It's not because Rowan Atkinson is shocking, and it's not because he's ever tried to be. It's because in an industry built almost entirely on performing a version of yourself for public consumption, he's spent nearly half a century quietly refusing to do it, and somehow that refusal has become one of the most fascinating performances of all. A lot of celebrities are excellent at looking like they're having the time of their life in front of a camera. Very few are willing to just look like themselves. Instead, crash or no crash, headline or no headline, laugh or no laugh. That's the part Rowan Atkinson seems to have mastered without ever appearing to try, because trying, of course, would rather defeat the point. So, when people say, nobody can handle Rowan Atkinson's nonchalant personality, maybe that's exactly right, but not because he's difficult. It's because most of us have never actually met anyone who simply doesn't perform for the room, and once you have, every other kind of famous starts to look a little bit exhausting by comparison. Which of these moments surprised you the most? The Brundle impression, the silent drive after the '99 crash, walking away from the burning McLaren in 2011, the Danish TV interview, interviewing Elton John without stealing the spotlight, or the one ball at a time approach to fame. Type your answer below and tell us which version of Rowan Atkinson you'd most want to sit next to at a party, the one telling jokes, or the one saying absolutely nothing at all. Let us know in the comments which one you'd want to see more of. And if you want more real stories about the people behind your favorite comedians and characters, hit subscribe. We've got more of these coming every week.